Hello world, welcome to the 208th climate change emergency protest here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. It is December 2nd, 2022. Next week will be December 9th, 2022 for the 209th climate change emergency protest. Right now it is 19 degrees Fahrenheit outside this morning and it's minus 7.2 degrees Celsius. So if I start goofing up my words, it's because I'm freezing right now. And as you can tell, we're on the wrong way concerning climate change. We're not addressing the issue, and I'm going to talk about that in a second here. So, the COP 27th conference in where the heck were they? In Egypt was a planned failure. There were 600 lobbyists there from the fossil fuel industry. And I call them lobbyists, they call them delegates, but you had 600 delegates there from the fossil fuel industry. This is a planned failure. That meant they weren't serious about it, allowing such people involved with the climate change talks. You can't get ahead with the same people that brought you to the problem to begin with. They have no intention of fixing it. Governments, especially the world, the United States especially, are not serious about climate change. They're not understanding the severity, the consequences of climate change, and definitely the inaction or action in the wrong way. It's the opposite action involves drilling. There's new drilling going on around the world, all the countries in the world right now, and you're not going to get out of the problem by continuing to do new wells. There's more than enough oil in the ground right now that is allocated. I think it's 2,700 gigatons, and supposedly, according to 350.org a few years ago, said we could only drill out another 500 tons of oil before absolute calamity happens. Well, that's misguided. There is no carbon budget, but that's assuming there's a carbon budget. So instead of 700 gigatons that's available, we can only use 500 gigatons of that before utter calamity. But I think they're utterly wrong about that. Things are happening right now concerning climate change and spinning out of control. We're hitting tipping points around the world as far as what's going on, and we won't be able to get it back. Once the book falls off the table, you can't stop it from hitting the ground. And it's a dismal situation we're in right now, and we need to address the issue immediately, but we have the wrong leaders in charge around the world and here in the United States on both parties. Concerning climate change, they aren't getting it. They aren't addressing the issue seriously. No one's tackling it. This should be a daily talk amongst all politicians, president, Congress, local people, everyone. This is what's coming, and they're uneducated as to what's happening, uninformed as to what's happening, or pure sinister as to what's happening. And they're in the pockets of big oil and big fossil fuels and all that stuff. So you need to call them out for what it is, but people are going to wait because they don't know what's happening because the media is not reporting it. So I'll get into that and the whole situation in a second here. It's not hopeless because I'm wasting my time. If I think it's hopeless, why am I out here? Why am I out here every week? It's ridiculous. This is number 208. It's a long time, a lot of stuff involved, and a lot of sacrifice being made, staying on this path that I'm on, and family is paying a price for it, my wife and I, and everything. But it's just it's not a good situation. And if I'm out here and I think it's utterly hopeless, then I'm wasting my time. And I think there's still a chance that we can get out of this situation or mitigate it somewhat. But the dice is already thrown on the table, and if we don't get moving on this issue immediately, the finality of it all is extinction. That's all it comes down to. And that doesn't mean a pleasant death, like you're just going to roll over and die. No, it's going to be horrific, and we need to get to this situation right now. Okay, so moving on from COP. $37 billion a year right now is being pledged by the United States for climate change. So it's part of the Inflation Reduction Act. It's short funded, and do the actions really affect climate change? Will it have any effect on it? I don't know. I don't know all the ins and outs of it. It seems like it's mealy-mouthed and doesn't go far enough. So $37 billion a year is being allocated for climate change. This gives us perspective. Okay, $91 billion right now have been committed to Ukraine, the war in Ukraine against Russia. There are no negotiations with war in Ukraine. There's no talk. There's no State Department involved. Eventually, all fights end up on the ground. This will end when both populations, United States, Europe, and Russia, finally realized they were being duped. This is continual war. This is the war machine. It returns nothing, and eventually all fights end up on the ground. The entire world is at war with climate change, though. This is bigger than all the wars combined that were ever in the history of the world. You got to understand that. I mean, this issue is a life-ending event that's going on for the whole world. So what will eventually happen, and what's starting to happen now around the world, as you can tell if you're aware of any news. Once you get outside the USA media, good luck with that, because you need to go on YouTube and discover haystacks and different things and get international news, African news, things like that. But what it's going to involve is everything, everywhere, all at once. There will be no escaping this once it goes full tilt. So right now, the United States and the governments of the world are involved in delay. COP27 was an example of delay. It involves lies and good cop, bad cop. You try to have a good party and a good someone that's on the good side, someone's on the bad side. But in reality, everyone's on the bad side right this second. uh, COP27 was an example of that delay. And I said before COP27 happened was that what's going to happen is that they will throw money at the developing world, the global South, and tell them, okay, now you can go on your way back home and everything's fine. But what it did, COP27, it didn't solve a single thing. In fact, they firmed up their desire to produce more natural gas and oil wells. They did not. The pledges and the statement that came out of COP27 did not even have the word, as far as I know, fossil fuels and things like that involved. How can you have a meeting about climate change and trying to reduce the effects of it and not have the word fossil fuels involved and trying to pledge to get rid of fossil fuels altogether? So it's really a bizarre thing going on. So what happens with the end of the COP27 is you lose another year. Now they're looking forward to COP28. Well, COP28, I believe, is in Qatar, which is another oil-producing nation. So there's another year going to be lost. We don't have years left. We have days, months left, and that's about it to get on this situation. It's been 7 years since the Paris Agreement back in 2015, where the world got together to pledge to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius since the industrial era. So that was 7 years ago. So Paris no longer applies to what's happening now. That was ancient history. And we need to double our efforts, triple our efforts, quadruple our efforts. But what will happen is eventually the Earth will not be able to, you won't be able to fight what's going on with the planet as far as tipping points and the catastrophe involved with climate change. And it'll be out of our control to be able to handle it. We can do adaptation at that point, try to mitigate a little bit, but eventually the whole system will fail. And when it does collapse, it's calamity shall ensue. And people are seeing that right now. You've seen that in the Horn of Africa. You see that with places affected by hurricanes and drought and things like that. So this is not a risk that we're doing on this path. This is not a risk. This is a guaranteed death sentence. Course action, we need to change our course immediately as to what's going on. And we're not going to do that because the public around the world does not understand. Now, if you're dying of whatever, you understand that something terrible is happening to you. But this is not a risk. This is a death sentence. Capitalism, and endless growth will affect everyone. It will kill everyone. Endless growth on a finite planet is called a cancer. Okay, eventually you run out of resources, and you can't keep going along this path. The best thing to choose right now is obviously this big orange ball in the sky that's rising up, and to harness that somehow. Not just solar panels, but something that does not involve fossil fuel production to harness that, passive solar, different things like that. There needs to be a new type of thought going on. So what's happening right now is there's bargaining, as in denialism, and also saying there's no tipping points. Oh, things will just continue on a linear path. And I truly believe our politicians believe that is what's happening. This will be a linear path, and things will just progress slowly. It'll be a slow boil, and then eventually we can get control of it. And that is not what's happening. What we're doing is we're approaching tipping points, like the book falling off a table, and you won't be able to get it back. Everything has a tipping point where it just can't continue on this path. Trees fall over, trees die, for example. Ice caps melt and into the sea. The effects of that is then you have an unweighting of the earth, and then you could end up with volcanoes and earthquakes and things like that. So it's a whole thing going on, this denialism. Tornadoes are happening right now in the United States. We just had a set of them yesterday or day before yesterday in November. Last year we had them in December, tornadoes. This was unheard of in the past. Supercharged hurricanes. You had Hurricane Ian in the south that hit. Yeah, we have hurricanes, and usually are Category 1. This thing blew up to Category 4, pushing a Category 5 in the distance from Cuba to Florida. I mean, that's crazy as to how fast that happened. That's like 90 miles or 100 miles away. And, it blew up from a Category 1 to a Category 4, pushing Category 5. We're seeing volcanic eruptions around the world, and this is my theory that once the ice caps melt or continue to melt, the weight shifts from the ice caps in the polar north and polar south and elsewhere around the world, in the Himalayas and in the Andes and things like that, that the weight shifts into the oceans from where it was originally. So that throws off things, and then what eventually happens is that you plate tectonic shifts involving earthquakes, volcanoes, and things like that, and you're going to have land changes. We might not see it in our lifetimes, but this is what's coming. You can't unweight something so badly and then expect nothing to happen as a result of it. Earth is a static system, and when you affect one thing, you start affecting a multitude of other things. So right now we're seeing floods, fires, drought, disease. We're extremely vulnerable to disease. No one talks about that. And I don't mean this COVID thing, and there's questions about that. But we're vulnerable to disease. You see this in Africa going on right now, in the Horn of Africa, that there's cholera outbreaks and things like that. And that's what happens when you get weakened by a lack of food or a good health situation. We're going to also end up with water shortages and food shortages, obviously, as a result of climate change. So it comes down to this. We need to put pressure on every politician. And I just don't mean Biden and Modi and different people around the world. We need to put pressure on all politicians as to how to mitigate climate change and harden up our communities as to what's going to happen when this starts occurring. There are things that people can do within their own communities and get rid of cement or cover it with trees, have tree-lined roads and things like that. And it's a win-win for everyone. So we need to put pressure on politicians. We also need nonviolent protests. Colleges, there's a local college here, Gettysburg College. I don't hear anything from them going on concerning climate change. They need to start protesting. And you start that with clubs and meetings and things like that. Get the real news as to what's happening concerning climate change. And it will eventually, if you start having protests, it will spread to other campuses. People will get the idea that something is wrong. And they have the most to lose. These college kids are going to grow up in a hellscape. And that's what's coming in their lives. They were born into a hellscape, and they don't even know it yet. They probably will not reach my age, the way things are going, unless we get on a different path. That's what I'm saying. It's not totally hopeless, but it is hopeless if we continue on this path. We will die. No one will get out of this alive. And I will see people in my lifetime before I die, people collapsing and dying all over the place. So, we need to get on this situation, and these kids here don't even know what's happening, and it's a shame that they don't. And it's a shame if they do know what's happening, but the thing about it is if you have the knowledge and then you do nothing with it, you're living a lie. That's all there is to it. You're living a lie as to what your life is all about, and you really don't care about anything else that's happening around the world. Oh yeah, I care about it, but I'm not willing to do anything. Well, at what point are you willing to fight for your very life, fight for your friend's life, fight for your family's life, fight for your neighbor's life? This is a crazy situation we're in, and we need to get out of this self-indulgence, babyish attitude about everything. So not only the college kids, but retirees, parents, teachers, basically everyone needs to get involved with protests. Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil, they all have their place as to what's going on. And they think Just Stop Oil is, oh, they're terrible. They're throwing soup at artwork under glass. It's going to get a lot worse than that. And this will pale into what's the real actions that are going to happen. And what we need is peaceful protests. Violence is not acceptable in these giant protests that we need to have. Violence such as the January 6th thing, which is political, but I don't care. January 6th involved mostly males aged 20 to 50 attacking the Capitol of the United States. So what happens with the danger of a violent situation is you end up largely with a male population doing the action, and it ostracizes everyone else. People will shrink away and not want to do that and not want to get hurt or hurt others. So violence is not acceptable in a protest. What you need, though, is the threat of massive amount of politicians protesting and forcing politicians out of office if they're not going to do their job correctly. So it requires an educated public, and the public is hugely uneducated in the United States as to what's going on. I was talking to Tanya about that the other night. I was like, people just don't even know what's happening. I think that we might be the only two in the whole area that knows exactly what's happening. And we need to learn more about what's happening, but we have a really good grip as to what's happening. So if it's 2 out of all of our friends, let's say 200, that's less than 0.5% of the population. And I think that's being extremely lenient as far as to people actually know what's happening. I think there are probably 500 people in the whole country that know exactly what's happening concerning climate change. So it requires an educated public. And how do you educate the public? Well, the media needs to have experts called in to actually tell the truth about climate change, not some pie in the sky thing saying everything's hunky-dory and we just need to do little things, collect plastic and recycle that and things. This is so far beyond that. The little things are important, but the big actions that are needed in policies is what's needed around the world. So the politicians right now, you look at the Congress, you look at the president, you look at local people, you look at regional people, there's no talk about climate change. There's no action concerning climate change. And the action that is being taken, some of the effects is continued drilling and things like that are actually going in the wrong way. So eventually what's going to happen with these politicians, and if they don't get on it, this is going to happen, and this is a guarantee what's going to happen. You're going to end up with breakdown of governments worldwide. They won't have a job because there's absolute chaos going on in the world. They need to, when people are drowning or starving or heat exhausted, they don't care what party is being represented by them. All they know is that they are dying. So we need to get on it. The idea that politicians, they think they can just get reelected and continue on this way is going to end quickly. And it won't take long. We're on a tipping point path right now, as I said, and if we don't get on it, there's going to be utter chaos coming, and it's not very far away. So it comes down to this, are you living a lie? Is your life a lie that you know what's going on, you sort of know what's going on, and you're still willing to do nothing about it, not talk to anyone, not do any protests, not do any things on social media and things like that? And that involves the college kids too. If you know what's happening and you know things aren't right, and I've heard this from people I know in college, that they say there's nothing, protests don't work, this doesn't work, that doesn't work. That is absolutely untrue, because we went through the 60s and the Vietnam War stopped because of the college kids. I went to protest myself in the 80s in New York City, and it was about the nuclear proliferation and nuclear weapons and the mutual assured destruction between the United States and Russia. And what that led to was protests around the world. And it came to agreements that the Russians and the United States would stop producing so many weapons and actually have a reduction plan. So protests do work. You had the civil rights era as well. You had Gandhi. You wouldn't have in India if there wasn't a Gandhi in all the protests. Okay, so the question comes down to, at the very end, if there are survivors or whatever, your kids, if there are any kids, are going to ask, what did you do? Why didn't you do something to save us? We're headed in this utter destructive path, and it comes down to, are you living a lie? What did you do to save them? So I'll catch you next week. That'll be number 209, and that'll be on December 9th. Hopefully it'll be warmer than today. Hopefully the talk was okay. I'm really cold. See you later. Bye.